Again, this is Kemi Adeosun speaking from the Federal Ministry of Finance in Abuja. This is our second Facebook Live. And today is the day we've designated Tax Thursday. As you know, every Thursday we're having a real focus on taxes for the next 1 year. So this Tax Thursday is the Facebook Live presentation, largely talking about taxes and revenue and what we've been doing. I think before I can talk about tax and revenue, and it's not a popular subject, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time just explaining why it's so important for where we're going economically and really the role everybody can play in that. One thing we've been saying very consistently is that Nigeria is not an oil economy. And we've been very consistent about that for the following reasons. One is obviously that oil price is very volatile and its decline has really put us into a lot of problems. But more fundamentally, oil economies tend to have a lot of oil and very few people. So Saudi Arabia, 30 million people, and they pump 10 million barrels of oil a day. So if they wanted to share their oil, 3 people share 1 barrel. Nigeria, you know the numbers, 180 million people, we only have 2 million barrels of oil a day. So if we wanted to share the oil, 90 people to share 1 barrel of oil. Now, most oil economies, because they have that mix, a lot of oil and very few people, can afford not to have a real tax system. So in Saudi Arabia, for example, the tax to GDP is 6%, same as Nigeria. But because Nigeria is not really an oil economy, we can't afford to do that because oil is actually only 10% of our GDP. And so if we follow that trajectory of being an oil economy, it won't work for us. We are actually closer to a mixed economy. Countries like Mexico, countries like Egypt. So Mexico, for example, has about the same oil as us, about 2.1 million barrels of oil a day, but 130 million people. Now their tax to GDP ratio is 20%. So really that's where we've got to head. We've got to move our tax to GDP from 6%, which is one of the lowest in the world. The only other economies that are down there, low tax to GDP, as I've explained, are oil economies, countries like Saudi Arabia. We cannot afford to be there. We've got to get money from the rest of the economy so that we can provide the goods and services that everybody needs. And in particular, it's very, very important for 2 reasons. One is that the outlook for oil price in the medium to long term is not high. And the second thing is our population growth is very rapid. It's about 8% per annum population growth. So if we don't fix our revenue formula, then really and truly we will not be able to position Nigeria's economy to where it really needs to be. And that's really what we're trying to correct. Now, let's go to the specifics of the tax system. How tax system works, and I like to use the example of the man who is directing traffic in the hot sun. Right now, that man, whatever his salary is, his tax is deducted at source and he gets his net. Whatever he wants to do in life, pay school fees, build a house, ride a car, is from his after-tax income. That's how it works all over the world. Now, what we found in Nigeria at the moment is that we only have 14 million taxpayers out of about 70 million people that are economically active. And that 14 million, the majority of them are people who have their taxes deducted at source. Largely lower income workers. So what does that mean? That means that the tax burden is not being shared fairly. It's being carried by those who are least able to afford it, whereas high net worth people are actually able to evade tax. Now, how do they do that? They don't get their monies deducted at source. They largely work through companies, and they're expected at the end of the year to compute all their income, deduct any relevant expenses, and voluntarily, under what we call direct assessment, pay those taxes to government. That's not happening on the right scale, number one. And number 2 is what we found is at the very high end, there is a disconnect. Those who are even filing and paying taxes are not paying the right amount. Now, a lot has happened in the last few months that is going to help us tremendously in being able to block those leakages. One is something called the automatic exchange of information, wherein foreign governments are now sharing information automatically from 2018. Bank accounts, who owns property, is now being automatically shared. In the past, we'd have had to go to that country individually and show just cause why they should share information with us. Now tax authorities are sharing information automatically. Also with BVN, we're able to see this one person, for example, is linked to 20 bank accounts. Then there's also been a lot of automation around land registry. So we can now draw up a picture of the taxpayer, his assets, her assets, their lifestyle. And that lifestyle must correspond to their tax returns, their tax status. So we don't have any problem with private jets. We're very happy to have lots and lots of private jets, but you buy a private jet out of your taxed income. If you have children abroad, you must be able to show that it's from your taxed income. And so what we've done is launched a voluntary asset and income declaration scheme to give people an opportunity to regularize. We know, we have the data now. We also engaged one of the world's leading private investigation agencies that traced assets for us all over the world, really. So we have a picture of the assets that people have. And as I've said, those assets are supposed to be purchased out of taxed income. So we're now giving people, under the Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme, an opportunity to go back over the last 5-6 years and restate their tax returns and regularize and pay any tax that they should have paid at the time. And in exchange, we're offering the opportunity that we will not charge interest, we will not charge penalties, which should normally have been paid, and will not do any audit investigation on the person as long as they declare honestly. And we're also providing an amnesty from prosecution for tax offences, because actually tax evasion is a crime. So we're saying we will not prosecute if you come clean. And so far, we launched it on the 1st of July. It runs till 31st of March. I've been very, very excited by the response that we've had from both Nigerian companies and individuals that, look, it's time to do the right thing for Nigeria. Nigeria needs money. We need to sort out our infrastructure deficit. We need to provide services for our people. We need to really rebuild this economy. We are borrowing at the moment, but we really feel that if we got the right revenues in, we wouldn't need to borrow as much. So this response has been very, very positive. I think there's a sort of attitude, sort of national recognition that we need to come together and get this done. And the response so far has been extremely positive. People asking, okay, how do I pay? What do I do? Do I take advice? So we think that the resistance to paying tax is breaking down. And of course, part of that resistance is that people feel that, look, even if I pay tax, what do I get from paying taxes? And our response to that is, which one came first, the chicken or the egg? Somebody has to break that cycle. And we have to break that cycle by doing the right thing. If the man in the hot sun is paying his or her taxes correctly, if the policeman is paying his or her taxes correctly, then the high net worth and middle class individuals must also do the right thing. Everybody must do what is needful. And on government side, we've got to be better at spending money. We've got to be more efficient, we've got to be more accountable, so that people can see, it's a partnership, people can see that as they pay, government is doing what government is meant to do. And we are, in this administration under President Muhammadu Buhari, incredibly committed to doing so, to doing the right thing, to providing value for money. We already have an efficiency unit. We're trying to cut costs wherever we can to make sure that when people do pay the taxes, they can see the benefits in their own lives. So that's my little introduction. I know questions have been coming in, and I'm going to take one or two of the questions, and as more questions come in, we'll have a bit more of an interactive section. So the first question is saying that PAYE do not evade tax. It is the wealthy business people who do not pay taxes, and this should be checked. Absolutely, I think that's the point I was making, that the person in the hot sun is paying his taxes, the teacher is paying her taxes. It is the high net worth people now who in the past could evade taxes. Why? Because the taxman couldn't really assess their income properly. We relied on the person to honestly declare. Now we don't need to rely on the person to honestly declare as much, because we have built the data. We've had a project running here in the Ministry of Finance now for about 15 months called Project Lighthouse. And what it's been doing is building profiles. So it looks at BVN, it looks at land records, it looks at car registration, it looks at private jet ownership, it looks at companies' house records. It's building a financial profile of the individual. What do you own, both here and abroad? And then we check your tax return. What did you declare? And once there's a disconnect, and in many thousands of cases, there's a huge disconnect. And once people understand how much data we have, they will begin to come into the tax net. And it will make life better for everybody, because at the end of the day, we're not just collecting taxes for the sake of collecting tax. We're collecting taxes because we've got to build schools. We're collecting taxes because we've got to fix our roads. We're collecting taxes because we've got to deliver power. So I think that question is very pertinent, and it resonates with our findings, which is really, it's the higher net worth individuals, it's the self-employed that are not doing the right thing. And then we have a lot of people who are in the tax net. So they have a full-time job, maybe they work in a bank, but you know Nigerians are very entrepreneurial. So many of us have 3, 4, 5 businesses that we're running on the side. Those 3, 4, 5 businesses are also taxable. And indeed, in some cases, what we find is that the main job is actually just a little bit of the income. You find someone selling jewelry and they're making a fortune, they're not paying any taxes. That's got to be corrected. So it's not just people who are fully self-employed, there are also people who are partially self-employed, who, in addition to what is deducted from their taxes at source, from their main salary, also need to make a declaration from their side businesses. And that's fine. I mean, that happens everywhere in the world. They also are embracing the VAIDS program. Another question, Adekola Remilekun said, I pray VAIDS will work. What about those high net worth individuals that deal majorly in cash? Also, I don't see any serious government tackling corruption, which I believe causes low patronage of taxpayers. Average Nigerians are not happy with any form of taxes because our government doesn't show the level of accountability and seriousness in the management of funds. I think that's a very genuine sentiment, which of course we must address. And I've said it, we've got to be more accountable, both at federal government level and state government level. We've got to show value for money. We've got to deliver projects. And I think this government, in fairness, has started to show that we can do that. We will do that. Once we have the money, we know what to do. Roads are getting done. Schools are getting fixed. Capital is being released and is being deployed properly. We've put monitoring and evaluation in now. We've put continuous audit in now. We've put a lot of structures in to make sure that money doesn't leak. On the issue of those dealing majorly in cash, as I've explained, the approach we're now taking to high net worth individuals is different. It's based on your assets. So the first thing we do is we profile you. What do you own? Where do your kids go to school? How many times did you travel? Where do you live? Which properties do you own? Then we build a profile. So, okay, according to us, you have a lifestyle that shows that you have a minimum income of about 50 million a year. And then we check your tax returns. How much did you pay? Maybe in some cases, and we've seen these type of cases, we profile someone and we say, look, based on this person's lifestyle, the minimum they're making every year is about 100 million. And we check their tax return, maybe they paid 2 million naira. So those are the kind of cases. What technology is allowing us to do is, you know, the taxman now knows you. That's really the general message. The taxman knows you. We have from BVN, as I've said, from cars, from overseas beneficial ownership registers. That's the other thing I must mention. Overseas governments, we've reached out to them and they've agreed to share data. So they're sharing data. Who owns properties in Chelsea? Who owns properties in Belgravia? So we're building a very accurate financial picture of people, not just on assets here in Nigeria, but assets all around the world. We've been, as you know, with the president, went to United Arab Emirates, went to Dubai. We have their cooperation and they're sending information to us automatically. So it's going to be a lot easier to profile people properly and make sure they pay the right taxes, which, as I keep saying, is only fair. It's unfair for us to leave the burden on the man directing traffic in the hot sun. Taxes must be paid by everybody for our common good so that we can provide the services that the people need. Someone asked, what about dealing with a special tax court that will deal with tax evaders subsequent to VAIDS so that we don't get entangled in long court judgments and procedures? That's Demi Ojo. I think that's also a very good suggestion. I mean, our focus right now is on the voluntary asset and income declaration scheme. We're giving people until March to come clean. But what we've said is after March, once you don't come clean, then we commence really very aggressive prosecutions. And we're going to be discussing with the CJ how about the possibility of setting up special tax courts so that indeed we don't get entangled. But having said that, you know, tax evasion is one of the easiest prosecutions. And it's one of the hardest things to defend because the law is very clear. There can't be very many defenses. If you have this asset, how did you get it? So either you have to come and tell us that you stole it, which is great, we'll send you off to the FCC, or you have to tell us that I have income that I didn't declare. So it's very easy to prosecute tax evasion. And I always use this example that, you know, the famous gangster Al Capone, they tried and tried and tried to get him on his criminal behavior. But he actually ended up in prison and he died in prison for tax evasion. So it's one of the easiest prosecutions. And I'm sure all around the world, those who are watching will know that there's a high profile focus internationally against tax evasion. They're picking up footballers, they're picking up high profile people and they're embarrassing them. on tax evasion. So Nigeria is going to join that club of people that will make tax evasion really, you know, it's as bad as corruption. It's another form of corruption. On the issue of corruption that you raised in your question, I think this government is doing all it can. We'll continue to focus on it. We're very committed to the fight against corruption. Corruption does fight back. Corruption tries to slow things down. But the thing is that the wheels of justice may quote the acting president, may seem to turn slowly, but they keep turning. And eventually we'll get them. And the evidence is the evidence. You know, if you've stolen, we have the evidence. It doesn't go stale. So we will keep on pushing on the fight against corruption, because it's very, very, very important for us to do so in order to deliver services for the people. I have another question here. How many, this is John Ramesh. John Ramesh, he says, how many people do you think find it convenient to pay taxes? I'm just getting another set of questions. Thank you, sorry about this. He says, what if my company is not remitting taxes that have been deducted at source? Good one. Whistle blow. Blow. Tell us about it. We will come after them. That's illegal. That's actually theft, because they're not only stealing from you, they're also stealing from government. So if company is deducting your tax, you can check with your local tax authority whether remittance has been made. And if it hasn't been remitted, please bring it to our attention, and we will certainly, from both FIRS and the state governments, go after such companies, because that's illegal. Please enlighten us on how the amnesty works. And someone said, Oluseto Patrick says, I hope this scheme is not only for the poor people. Let me take those two questions. So I've explained how the tax amnesty works. People have a window of 9 months to go and regularize their tax status. Look at your status, look at your lifestyle, look at the assets that you hold. How did you pay them? How did you fund them? Have you paid tax on those monies before you bought those assets? So we're not saying if you own a house abroad you have to pay tax on it, but what we're saying is when you bought that house abroad, where did you get the money from? If that money came from Nigeria and you are, or you are a Nigerian resident taxpayer, did you pay the right taxes before you bought that house? Because the way it should work, and I use this example again, the man directing traffic in the hot sun, if he wants to build a house, it's from his taxed income. And it's the same everywhere. That's what the law requires. So people have been able to evade taxes and buy assets. Now we're saying, from using what they call the asset-based approach, work backwards. Did you pay the right taxes? Can you justify those assets? If the taxman comes knocking on the door today and says, Mr. X, you have this house, you have this property, you have this company, you live this lifestyle, and yet you only paid 1 million naira in tax. How are you able to afford this lifestyle? So you only have two options. You either tell us you stole the money, which is, as I say, a problem for the EFCC, or you had income that you didn't declare, or you inherited it. And if you inherited it, tell us who you inherited it from so that we can verify. So there's a lot of activity going on. It's not aimed at the poor. It's really very much aimed at everybody. But if people have not paid tax, whether you're rich or poor, VAIDS is a great opportunity to regularize. It says, will individuals, Henry Igwe says, will individuals and companies have to pay all backlog of established liabilities or taxes going forward? And Odukoya Solomon says, how do you plan to ensure that all government vehicles and big people also pay taxes? And he says ministers. Okay, well, ministers, I'll talk about ministers, because ministers, we have our taxes deducted at source. And as you know, as ministers, we're not allowed to do any other business other than farming whilst we're serving. But people have companies, people have income that they had before, and of course they are also entitled to come and regularize their tax status. VAIDS is open to everybody. So if in the past, before people became ministers, they had tax issues, they are also consulting and doing the right thing. It says, how many will companies have to pay the backlogs? Absolutely. If a company has underpaid its tax, that's an offence. What we're saying though is that come regularise. If you don't have the cash, we can work out a scheme to give you time to pay. We've built that in because we know that with what's been happening in the economy, in some cases the companies actually spend the money and they don't have it, but they owe it, and that's fine. We will, as long as you admit and you sign up, we can give time to pay, and then you of course must commit to paying the right taxes going forward, so that we don't end up here again. But really, the overall objective is to move our tax to GDP, our tax compliance rate, from 6%. Really, we need to be in the 16% range. Ghana's at 15, South Africa's at 24, Nigeria's at 6. We can't afford to be at the bottom of the class when it comes to tax evasion, and yet want to be at the top of the class when it comes to government service provision. It's not going to work. So we've really, as a nation, got to come together and sort this out. And I think there's no better time. And, you know, some countries don't have oil. If we didn't have oil, in fact, before we had oil, we lived on taxes. Most of the work that was done, the old roads, the old railway, it was done from the cocoa, the groundnuts, the stuff we had before oil came. So now we've got to rewind and reset and go back to doing the right thing. And that will position this country put this country in an amazing position for the future, because we'll not be dependent on oil. We'll have a far more diversified economy, and as it grows, government will get a little bit of what the value that's created within the government and use it to provide services for the people. And that, incidentally, is how it's done all around the world. Many of us grew up in jurisdictions where you grow up knowing you're going to pay taxes. You even pay taxes when you die. We don't have inheritance taxes here. Inheritance taxes are real in other countries. So if we really aspire to be like many of the countries we admire, we've got to get this tax issue right. David Doya says, to what extent do you see tax compliance increasing by the 31st of March? And Frank Iriri says, how do you plan to tackle corruption that allows some people to underpay taxes? These are all very good questions. I mean, by 31st of March, I expect many thousands of people to embrace the VAIDS program. So far, as I've said, the response has been very good, especially from companies who are really now coming clean because they know that we have the data to come after them. They don't want to be embarrassed, and they're saying, okay, this is a very reasonable offer by government. You're not going to charge interest, you're not going to penalise us, and you're giving us time to pay. A lot of people are taking advantage of it. So we do expect to collect quite a lot of money by the 31st of March, both in cash and in commitments. Other countries have done this. Indonesia has had a very successful tax amnesty. India's done one. Turkey's done one. As part of designing the program, a team from the Ministry of Finance and FIRS actually went to these countries and South Africa and studied what they did. And we built in a lot of what they told us into how we design this program. For example, one of the countries told us that they use the Panama Papers to extract information. We've now started doing that. We were extracting information from other sources, but when they pointed out Panama Papers, we've now got a team that's scrolling through the Panama Papers, looking for Nigerian names, putting them into our database to pick them up. So that, once Nigerian taxpayers, particularly high net worth, realize there's nowhere to hide, and also it's the time to do the right thing. I think that's a combination of sentiments. They're going to catch me anywhere, and actually, this is the right thing to do for the nation. We've got this whole campaign, which is starting next week, called I Declare. I declare my nation, my duty. Or is it the other way around? My duty, my nation. It's my duty, my nation. Corrected. But really, it's our duty. This is a national duty. People get very patriotic about Nigeria. Being a Nigerian is not about the name, it's not about the flag, it's about doing the right thing. And we're trying to really imbibe that culture. So I think as we get together, as people pay more taxes as well, it does fight corruption, and that's the answer to Frank's question. The problem at the moment is this: most state governments, there's no input from the people in where the state government gets its money from. So they come to Abuja, give you money, and it goes back to the state. But when you in the state actually pay money into that state government, you'll get involved. You'll join a political party. When they call you for a budget town hall, people will turn up. They'll want to know what exactly is the government planning to do. So you'll get a lot more engagement from the public, and that's what keeps an eye on government. That's what keeps an eye and checks corruption and checks wastage and makes sure that money is spent not on wasteful projects but on needful projects. So I think that partnership of the taxpayer and the government is very, very critical. If government gets money that it doesn't need the people, is not accountable to the people for, it's very easy for that money to go astray. But when your money is there, then you make sure that really people do the right thing, and I think that's very important. It's important for government, it's important for the people. How are we doing for time? They say good. Okay, so we'll keep going. Pan Okafor says, please let's start implementing tax on first-class tickets, luxury goods, champagne. What do you think? I think yes. We signed something yesterday on luxury goods, champagne, brandy, whiskey, wine, jewellery, high-end jewellery. We've signed something that will be being rolled out, and a surcharge on first class and business class tickets. So we've signed something. We're just doing the final parts of the implementation, but yes, absolutely. And we also want to try and amend the tax payable on high-end cars. Oh yes, luxury cars are also included. There's an additional surcharge on luxury cars. King Davis says, how will citizens benefit from this scheme? What's in it for the citizens? And then the questions on cigarettes and luxury taxes. So, how do citizens benefit? Well, if we move our tax to GDP ratio up, it means two things. One is that we'll be able to provide more services to our people. Many of the things that we're not able to do are a function of the fact that we just don't have enough money. We need to build more schools, we need to build more hospitals, we need to build more roads. Now, this is not rocket science, okay? Every country has this challenge. There's nothing that we're facing that other countries haven't faced, and they fixed it. So we've looked, every poor nation, you look at all the poor nations, they have very low tax compliance rates. And every rich nation have high compliance rates. So we want to be a prosperous nation. We've got to move from those nations that are not collecting and taxes and doing the right thing with them to those who are. And we've got to model ourselves on them. So what's in it for the citizens? If everybody pays, and as I've said, at the moment, the burden is being carried by the lower end of the pyramid. If the middle class come in, the upper class come in, the high, ultra high net worth come in, pay the right taxes, there'll be far more money. There'll be far, tongue-tied. There'll be much more money in the pool to be spent on the services that we need. Schools, roads, hospitals. These things all around the world are what we call public goods, and they are funded from taxes. And I remember that many countries have no oil. They're countries that have absolutely no natural resources at all, and they're more prosperous than us. We have a fairly diversified economy, only 10% is oil. So the other 90% now needs to begin to contribute. And the way that contribution happens, when we keep saying, oh, non-oil, we want to rely on more on non-oil, it's through the tax system. It's making sure that the people that are in real estate are paying a bit, the people in services are paying a bit, and we pull that money and really begin to provide world-class services for our people. And, you know, if you've been all around Nigeria, you see the need. You see the number of people that are living in poverty. We can lift people from poverty if we have the right money. Look at the social intervention program. You know, paying families, the poorest families, and not that many so far. We have so many more we want to bring on. But we were hearing stories yesterday of what 5,000 naira a month is doing in our poorest families, the disabled, orphans, you know, those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. We could do so much more in the economy if we had more money. That's for the poorest. Then at the middle, if our public school system improved, many people who are currently paying school fees would move their children back into the public school system. A lot of people that are very successful today were educated in public schools because the public schools were good. We can recreate that. Same with the health system. A lot of people die needlessly because we don't have the right health facilities. We train a lot of our doctors. As soon as they qualify, they're off abroad. Why? Because Nigeria can't even pay them a decent living wage. If we have the right money, you know, we can do this. There is absolutely nothing unique about our problems that we will not be able to solve. We pull together, we have a credible budget, we fight corruption, we fight wastage, we make sure everybody who's meant to pay taxes pays the right taxes, brings the money into the pool, and then we hold people accountable. That's what's in it for the citizens. The citizens have an assurance of a far, far better Nigeria. And a Nigeria that will not be having boom and bust cycles where we have 1 year we're happy and the next year we're in recession. We'll grow at a stable and consistent pace if we have a very stable tax base. I think it may be time to go. Someone's looking at me from behind the camera. So
something for Diaspora.
Okay. The questions from the, sorry, sidebar.
Yeah, how does it affect how does VAIDS affect people in diaspora?
Okay. All right. There's a question about the diaspora, whether VAIDS affects the diaspora, and I think this is a good question because I got into trouble when I went to London with my mum because she thought that we were going to have to pay. She was going to have to pay taxes, and she was telling me how she's lived in London for 50 years. She's paid her taxes. Why should I come and tax her? It's not any Nigerian. It's Nigerians resident for tax purposes. So it's not every Nigerian all around the world that now has to start paying taxes in Nigeria. If you are a Nigerian resident for tax purposes, it means you live in Nigeria for 185 days of the year. So we've signed bilateral agreements with many countries. There's no double taxation. So if you're paying your taxes in the UK, or you're paying taxes in America, or you're paying taxes in Canada, you're not affected by this scheme. However, if you are collecting rents on properties, we found that in our profiling, we found a lot of properties are owned by Nigerians in the diaspora. They collect the rent and remit it to America, or they keep it here in their name, but they don't pay tax on it. Those rents that you collect in Nigeria, or those dividends in Nigeria, to the extent that you didn't declare them in the country you live in, you need to declare them under VAIDS. So in that regard, some of the diaspora are affected. But the vast majority of Nigerians just doing their jobs or running their businesses abroad, no, we're not taxing you. We are taxing Nigerian residents, many of whom also own properties abroad. So I need to make that clarification, especially to my mum. There's no tax for people that live abroad and work abroad. You're already paying your taxes there. We don't have any issues with you. The people that we are targeting are those who are Nigerian resident for tax purposes. And the thing is, the way the treaties work is you must pay tax somewhere, so you can't avoid tax completely. So if you are in England, show us that you're paying taxes in England. But if you're a Nigerian resident and you're paying taxes in England, then we have some issue with you, which is around adequacy of your tax returns, and for that we are already comparing notes with the Inland Revenue or the IRS in America. But if you are resident for tax purposes in Nigeria, you have to pay your taxes in Nigeria. So if you might live abroad, you may be holed up in Dubai or holed up in London for most of the year, but to the extent that you are registered in Nigeria as a taxpayer, you have to pay your taxes here in Nigeria, including taxes on income that you earn abroad. So a Nigerian that owns a property abroad and rents it out, that income is taxable in Nigeria. The fact that you didn't remit it to Nigeria, the tax laws don't make that distinction. The fact that you earned it, you have to declare in Nigeria and pay tax on it in Nigeria. That's what the law requires, and that's what we'll be enforcing. So, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you all for your great attention. Thank you for your questions. As I say, today is Tax Thursday, and what we do on Tax Thursday is there's a lot of activity all over the country, people going out, giving out flyers. We're in shopping centres, we go to shopping malls. We have our community tax liaison officers, who are the young graduates that we're training, who are going out to educate people on the tax system. So we'll be going out shortly and doing a lot of activity, but this is one such activity. We'll be doing a lot more to engage people on the tax system, because what we found out is that in many cases people don't know. What we want to end up with a situation where as people come into the workforce, they know that they're going to have to pay taxes. They know that it's their duty, they know that it's their civic responsibility, but more importantly, they know that doing so derives a huge benefit to them in terms of services that government will be able to provide. Thank you so much for listening.